you ever spent hours and probably weeks writing a state complaint, trying to find the documents to put in there for your evidence? And it's like, you finally get it submitted to the State Department, you're waiting weeks, right? And you get the response and you get the report from the state complaint officer. And so you're like, I gotta hurry up and read this. And you kind of scroll to the end to see what the decision is. And you celebrate because finally the school district has been shown to be out of compliance. And it's like, finally. And you read the corrective action plan of now what the district has to do. And you know what? It feels like a slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this is painful. This is painful when we know the school district is out of compliance, and yet there's not really much teeth in that, in that corrective action plan. So if this sounds familiar to you, stay tuned because this is what we're going to be talking about. And we have a wonderful special guest today. So I'm Charmaine Tanner, and I am so happy that you were here with us today. As a parent, as a retired teacher, as an advocate now, the connections that I make with other advocates and attorneys are so rich. And our special guest today, Amy Martz, is one of those attorneys that I have been learning a lot from. So when she had an opening on her schedule, it was like, Amy, come on and be a guest for us. So Amy it's like a varied background that is like so wonderful because it gives her all these perspectives. So Amy's been a teacher. She's been a principal. She has 4 spirited children, as she calls them. And she's also a special ed attorney now. So, and she's been practicing for quite a few years as an attorney. So, Amy, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I know people are going to just gain so much from you. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
So what would you like to add to that introduction that I might have missed about you?
You did wonderfully. I taught mostly 4th and 6th grade, and I principaled for 13 years. And in Utah and Idaho, we are the lowest systems in the United States. And so I got tired of selling chocolate bars in order to fund education. And that's when I decided we've got to try something to fix the problem. So I went back to law school. And then, of course, COVID hit and everything went nuts. So it's a long journey.
It is. But like I said, I think there's perspective. So when you go in a meeting and there's a principal there, right, you can say, I understand the stress of being a principal. Mm-hmm. However, we also
I'm also the mom of a kid with autism, so I understand the stress of being the parent too. I have balled at the IEP table myself.
I know. You could be all the required members, just you sitting there alone. You could have a meeting by yourself and think of all the good things that could be decided.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
Would be wonderful. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the cases that I've helped Amy with was a case here in Idaho. So we're lucky that Amy, even though she lives in Utah, she also practices in Idaho. So she was able to help a family in Garden Valley, Idaho, which has made a lot of press. But one of the things that it just was such a rich learning experience for me. There was another attorney from Idaho that was there, Sharkwati, and I just had 2 of the best mentors to, observe this due process in the meetings that we had before that. But one of the things that impresses me so much about Amy is her humanness and her, if you were on our master class a week or so ago, we talked about tactical empathy. And I think, Amy, you really exude that.
Well, thank you.
As far as, yes, I don't know if you want to talk about that. And then, we can get into some specifics about state complaints, but just that the way that you talk to people, the way that you ask questions, I think so many of us can learn from that.
Yeah, yeah. To clarify one point, I'm not licensed in Idaho, but I have to
Right.
have a babysitter attorney and that I'm able to participate with the support of a licensed Idaho attorney. So
That's true. That's
don't want
true.
any bar complaints.
Sorry. Yes.
No, no, I think part of, I mean, I operate as an attorney the way I operated as an educator and a teacher and a principal. I really like people. I like weird people. I like annoying people. I like all kinds of different people. So I tend to look past any kind of behavior that can be different from the human you are. As we know, if parents of tough kids, there's the human, and then there's the behavior the human is having. And I often can also apply that to adults in a setting who, might be under a lot of pressure from a district or feel the need to lie or lose their job or are just in great deal of fear because I'm present. So I just tend to tell myself the stories of what they might be going through while we're sitting there in that meeting. Not that I don't fight like heck for our kids, but also just realizing that most of the time, especially in our states where we have so little funding, like they're not being mean to our kids on purpose. Occasionally they are, but very rarely. But the real problem is there's not enough money to go around. And so everybody at that table has been told, don't give this family anything because it just doesn't exist. If we get it, then some other family doesn't get it. And that's the tough reality in our state. But the answer is to push for everyone to get what they need by asking for our kids. And then someone will have to eventually figure out the funding problem and make sure there's enough money for everybody. So that's part of when I approach a meeting, I look at what are the pressures everyone there is under, try to be as kind as possible, but direct and get questions answered. So that's sort of my life approach.
Well, and yeah, and what happens is, even though there's disagreements, there's still that sense of relationship, and and you just really show that we can agree to disagree, and you are assertive when you need to be there, right? And you need to do that. So I think for parents, and it's hard, right? Because it's
Mhm.
such an emotional time when you're sitting
Yeah.
there
You're
as
a
a
mama bear and your baby's being hurt and it's real it's hard. It's a different I'm not as good at it as the parent. So I feel your pain.
I know, because it's like I teach these things. I'm supposed to use them,
Mhm.
right? But so let's get to some questions. There were some people that weren't able to be here with live, but we I want to also welcome people that are here, even from Ohio. So I love it when we get representation around the country. So say hi and let us know where you're watching from. Um, but one of the questions came up, and this is from an advocate in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma has lots of, like everybody, right? Lots of things going on that need to change. But one of Christy's questions was, we are getting little to no guidance on what exactly the State Department is missing to investigate. They are saying that complaints are insufficient, but we have documentation of violations. Would it be worth it to file every violation separately in hopes of getting clearer guidance? I realize that this will piss the SDE off, but we
Sure.
aren't sure what else to do.
Right, right. No, that's an excellent question. The requirements, my understanding, and again, we're sort of Utah and Idaho focused, but all you need is your name, address, phone number, email if you'd like. and a statement of the facts you are alleging. Like there's no benchmark for how much of a great violation you assert or don't assert. So they are not supposed to be the decider of what gets investigated. So as long as you give them the contact information essentially and a reasonable accusation of they missed a meeting or they didn't follow my kid's IEP, that should be enough for an investigation to happen automatically. So it sounds like what you might have to do is file a state complaint against your state organization and
Right.
say you're acting improperly to deny my request for an investigation. The hurdle is really low. The bar is low for them to say no to you. So, and it is very unusual. I mean, we might get the only reason you're allowed to reject somebody outright is if they've never had an IEP. So even though you might be arguing child find, that's the one time when, if we've not even done an evaluation, they might say, go back and do that and come back if you're not happy. But there's almost no other reason that's valid to say we're not going to investigate your concern. So I would move up the chain or try an Office for Civil Rights complaint against the state and
Huh.
say they're refusing to investigate my state complaints and there's no valid reason to deny it. So
Right, right. But thank you. And
mhm.
and maybe I jumped ahead there with the question. So I don't know if we want to back up, Amy,
Sure.
and you give a little bit of like when's a good situation to file a state complaint,
Yep.
or when, how do you know, like maybe mediation is better,
Yeah.
or we know due process is the most legal, the most expensive, but
Right.
could you give people like an idea of when do you do what as
Yep.
far as?
Let's do our triangle for a minute. So if you
Oh,
wouldn't
good.
mind, let's see, do I have to share a screen or now you can flip to my screen?
I can share your screen.
Okay, share my screen.
So,
There we go. Good job. All right. So just to clarify, my one hat is Martz Law, where I'm an attorney, and I'm not offering any legal advice today. So we don't have a client relationship in any way. But I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit. Now it's all set up. It's the time to fundraise, and I can't stand to do it. So right now we're just offering resources versus like actual advocacy work. So we're trying to collect and build this website as we go along that is sort of the family perspective on issues in special education. So, a little bit of an overview of what's here. Our problem in Utah and Idaho is that we're $5,000 or $6,000 for every single child from the national average. So we're not playing in the same game that the rest of the nation is playing. In this little map, you can get on and take a look. This is iepstudentcenter.org, by the way. You can see that this little chain of Idaho, Utah, and Arizona, we jockey for the last position in education funding across the United States. So we win. Sometimes you win for being the biggest loser. So yeah, welcome to the West. So this is Utah specific, but it's the same structure for dispute resolution under special education in every state with just a very few minor state-based changes. So, ideally in the area of special ed, they're supposed to child find you. Like you shouldn't have to do anything. They might meet your 3-year-old who's not talking yet. Hey, can we test that kiddo? Because he's got a really interesting speech pattern, So they're supposed to identify or say, he's not quite keeping up in math the way the other kids are. Do you mind if we do a little bit of assessment? Let's find out. So it's the school's job to locate you and identify areas of concern. Then that IEP team is supposed to take care of you, right? So then they talk you through the steps. Now we're going to do an assessment. Now we're going to decide, is he eligible? Let's sign this form. Now we're going to make a plan. Do you like the plan? So it's not your job as a parent to know what to do. And so often parents who come to me have had such a bad experience and they regret that they didn't know more sooner. You just got to let that go because it's their job to teach you. If you didn't know, it's not your fault. It's a complicated area of law and I'm still learning things every single day. So please forgive yourselves if you feel like you should have done something earlier. It's irrelevant at this point and it's not your fault. So within every state, there is a type of parent center. So you usually have like a disability advocate center that's required that does adult and children things. And then there's supposed to be a parent-based advocacy system where parents help parents. Whether that happens the way it's designed is a different matter, but those are your basic places to start when you have a concern. Then moving up from that, I often tell parents, have you reached out to district or charter school director, or, have you moved up the food group a little bit to try to find somebody who has a little bit more authority to inform them of the problem? You can bring an advocate. So, the Charmaines are few and far between as well, but she's amazing. And there's a few other friends we met at the COPA conference who do this nationwide, virtually, of course, because they're in a different location. But, finding someone, even if it's a sister-in-law who's a teacher, to start coming with you and asking questions. So when I have an especially mean person or couple of people on an IEP team, that's when mediation becomes a good option. It's a relatively simple application to present to the state education agency. And it just says, you know what, we just need somebody to kind of, you guys meet in your room, we meet in our room, and we're going to kind of negotiate a decision here. So when people have been unkind or raised their voice or really are gaslighting you, that's a great first step to say, I just need some help here. Some states have facilitation where they bring in a person who's supposed to be neutral, but they can't give you any legal advice. They're just there to say, thanks everyone for being so nice today. They don't really have any, they're not assisting in whether or not the law is being followed. Most mediators will at least say, that's not my understanding of how IDEA works. So it can be a great resource depending on who's on your roster, because every state hires their own dispute resolution folks. So then if things aren't going well, this is what Charmaine was talking about with state complaint. So a state complaint is also a fairly simple form. They must provide a sample form for you, but you're not required to use it. I think they get picked over less if you just use their form. I just put see attached and use their form and send it in. That way we don't have to argue about whether the address is missing or something.
Huh.
The benefits of state complaint. So the reward for your kid is relatively small. But we have sort of a philosophy, you and I, that the only way to make policy change within a state is to use up the resources that are designed to fix these problems. So, for example, in Utah, we've averaged our highest number of state complaints over the last 10 years was 35. And this year we hit 54, and I'm elated. First of all, because it stops the state from saying, look, everyone's so happy. We only had 20 complaints this year.
Exactly.
And second of all, because every investigation costs money. And we know that people don't really take notice or action until it affects someone's pocketbook. So to me, the more investigations we send through, the more money that has to be spent. Eventually, it's going to deplete that resource. And the state's going to have to say, we need some more money over here. And they're going to say, why? So suddenly when there's a need and they have to admit that things aren't perfect out there, then I think that's how you start the conversation about the resources are inadequate, the services are inadequate. So I would encourage everyone to try the state complaint, even though the outcome for your kid could be very meager. It might just say they have to train the staff. It might just say your kid gets 20 hours of comp ed from the people that were being mean to him in the first place. So sometimes that result isn't the best, but it's also a really great second opinion. So, if you work with myself or Charmaine or another advocate and they say, that's wrong, that school's not supposed to do that. And then you get a state complaint in and they go, we agree on these 4 out of 5 things. You are right. They didn't do it correctly. Then now you have at least 3 voices, yours, your advocate, and then the state complaint investigator, all saying school's doing it wrong. So in trying to convince somebody who's very sure that they have the right to do what they're doing, that gives 3 different voices that are saying, no, you really don't. So it's helpful for that as well. If you're looking forward to move up this triangle to a more rigorous complaint process, it's really nice to have a first opinion by which to base your decision to move up. And also, if you don't win, it might be because you're missing some information. Like you might go, oh, we needed to have a calendar and count out the suspension days, and we didn't do that. So she didn't count them right. So now you have sort of a better game plan to go forward into a more litigious method. So it's 60 days. It looks back 1 year. I would always do it. I always go to one IEP meeting as an advocate. And then if we're not happy with their efforts, then we usually go ahead and file. So this OCR stands for Office for Civil Rights. It probably should be a little wart on the outside of the triangle because it is your only option if you only have a 504. With our current state of things in education at the moment, I feared they would be completely dead. Like they fired half their staff, they closed some of the offices. I am speaking to people from OCR, and they're out there somewhere. Things aren't going well, but it isn't dead yet. But if you engage in any of the processes within the triangle, OCR will say, we're going to dismiss your case until you go through that process and then let us know if you're still not happy. So that's not right, but that's what happens. So if you're going to go file a state complaint or a due process, you waste your time to file with OCR at the same time, because as soon as they learn you've done that, they will stop completely and send you a dismissal letter. So, however, you only have 180 days to get your complaint in with OCR. So there's a decision to be made. If you file with OCR and like put your bookmark in the book, right, and they dismiss it, you get to come back and you've at least put your place mark there. So that is one reason to go ahead and do it. Their online form is not difficult, but you really need more than just the form requires in order for them to begin and to investigate. And they do have a higher threshold for deciding to investigate or not than the state does with their state complaints. So mediation can come up at any level. You can mediate here, you can mediate here, you can even mediate in federal court. So don't discount that as a power. We're really, ultimately, you don't want to go to trial. You don't want to spend $2 million in 5 years of your life going, litigating. So we really are saying, are you ready to settle yet? Are you ready to settle yet? So keep mediation happening at least yearly to try to say, are you ready to just fix this and move on and, compensate for what's happened? So let that be, I always tell people, you want to take it as far as you need to feel like you did everything you should have and could have, but stop with the fighting as soon as you can, because it eats you up and it's not good for you and your health. It's not good for your kids. So I do not like due process or federal litigation, but we do it because it has to be done sometimes for leverage. So, and it's just, yeah, if you can work with the school and fix it first, that's great. But you're usually here because that didn't work, which I completely understand. So the next level up is called a due process complaint. It's about the same difficulty of sending in as a state complaint form. They look very similar, but it's a whole different ballgame. And there are people who have done it pro se or whose advocates have tried to help. It is a full trial. I can't do it. My price tag right now is about $40,000. And part of that's because in order to win in a state where nobody won for 17 years, we have to be so good and so prepared and have 4 documents and 3 witnesses for every statement. So it shouldn't, I don't know what other people charge, but right now that's what it's taking to give us an opportunity to win, because for 17 years in Utah, not a single family won. So it's exhibits, it's objection, Your Honor, it's sparring with witnesses, and you're getting cross-examined. So it's pretty serious. It's actually harder than an actual trial because the rules of evidence are relaxed, which just means it's up to the due process hearing officer to make decisions, and there's no rules to guide you. So in my very first hearing, I said he made a decision, and I said, Your Honor, I really am new to this. It's my first ever due process. Could you help me understand where I can go to look to understand why you made that decision? And he leans back and says, from my many years of experience as a due process hearing officer. And I was like, well, freak, So anyway, so it could be even more frustrating than actually going to court. But here's the problem. This is your gate. In order to go to federal court under special ed law, you must do a due process complaint. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't pursue ADA and 504 outside of the triangle, but that means you can't complain that your child wasn't educated or didn't learn or didn't get a FAPE, or that they broke a meeting notice where they didn't have the right people at the meeting. So if you want to argue things that are your right under IDEA, you have to follow the triangle to the top in order to get to federal court. So there's very few times when I think we can separate it and make it just about discrimination and not about IDEA. But even myself, I find myself going back to the trough and drinking that IDEA water and saying, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that. It's really hard not to say, and you didn't educate my kids, so you stink. So, but that's sort of the big picture. So really start with state complaint. It's cheaper. It's faster. It only looks back 1 year, but at least you get an idea of whether you're right or not. And let's use up those state resources appropriately. Like, I'm not conniving to hurt the state in any way. Our kids need help, and they need it through the state complaint.
Right. And I know there was one state complaint that Amy and I were recently looking at. And what I like to do is then look at the language that the state complaint officer used.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can keep a document with,
Mm-hmm.
suggested language to
Yeah.
use, because like they're citing the regulation, so if you haven't seen that regulation before,
Mm-hmm.
so all of those pieces can be really helpful, besides just did you prevail, and what does a corrective action plan look like.
Right.
um,
Excellent.
the other thing, and I wanted to share this because this has come up several times for different families where parents are really worried about the retaliation when filing a complaint. So, what words of wisdom do you have there?
I never say never because I've been sadly surprised. There's always a risk. And probably if you're in this community, you're here because you've been retaliated against in some way. So we know it happens. I usually can get away. So when I finesse it as an advocate and we do a state complaint, we usually can stay at the school. So I say, if you do a state complaint and we stay nice about it and now we have a decision, let's get it fixed. It's still in the let's train you, let's repair it. You can usually still stay in your placement at your location and keep the relationship. It strains it, but you can move on from that. If you go to due process, you better start looking for a new school, because I bring those teachers in and I have to show them every mistake that they made and say, could you help me understand why you screwed this up? It's horrible. Nobody feels good. Everyone feels like they've been abused. It's usually not the teacher's fault, because if they had that helper aid that we've been asking for, they wouldn't have happened in the first place. So if you go into due process, it's a full-on trial, and it would be difficult for any human to not be impacted by the way that feels, especially when you're a teacher who does love kids and you're stuck in the middle of this situation, and you're going to get fired if you speak up to your principal or district, and yet you like this kid. It's an impossible position, and it makes people as ill as you feel when it's going badly. They feel just as sick most of the time. Sometimes they should, because they've been naughty, but most of the time it's people are stuck in the middle. So I would never think retaliation doesn't happen. But I do tell people who want to stay at their location after the state complaint is done, I said, okay, the relationship has been damaged. And unfortunately, now you have to make the effort to build back the trust and relationship, because we tattled to mom, and mom came down and, slapped their hand or whatever. So there is your responsibility in that situation to make efforts to, sometimes it's just looking him in the eye and keeping your smile on, instead of being like, you have to manage your poker face and your attitude, and not avoiding, just little things that you have to do to sort of show you, I'm okay, so you can be okay and we can be okay. So it's work, though. It's definitely work, and it's not your fault that the work has to be done, but it's your kid. So now we have to build back that relationship if we're going to stay there and try to educate our kiddo in that setting.
Yeah, because that can be really, and I think that's what a lot of districts count on, is
Mm-hmm.
the parents are fearful, so therefore we can keep pushing back, because they're going to reach the point of like, well, I guess I can't do anything further.
Yeah.
So
They wear down most parents. Those of
yeah.
you that are here are the ones who've survived gaslighting, and you've kept going. And as maybe some of you have gone and rested and come back to the fight, but they're used to gaslighting you till you go away, and then it's not their problem anymore. So those of us that hang are like, no, they don't like us at all.
Well, I know, really. Well, and speaking of retaliation, so here's another question. It says, what do we do when we suspect that the State Department is neglecting to investigate in a retaliatory way? They are
Wow.
tracking who created the documents and seem to be consistently rejecting complaints that involve advocates. Um,
Oh, that's
so
neat.
yeah, so the issue of them Yeah, neglecting to investigate,
Yeah.
and because they're looking at who filed the complaint. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So, I think of a quick way to just test your theory, which is to ghostwrite. So do it for each
Huh.
other, or do it for the parent and leave your name off. It doesn't, like, the state can investigate and go directly to the parent and without too much danger of harming your parent or your kid. And you can be some guide on the side and just test. Like, I'd do a little experiment and see, whether put in someone's false name, or I don't know, just pick a friend and say, "Hey, Joyce, will you come be the advocate for this one?" Just to try it out. So I would definitely test the theory and gather documentation of that. Um, we are so currently in Utah, we have a federal lawsuit, and I can speak of it because it's now public on Pacer. But the situation was a due process where we won, and then the district would not settle with the family.
Huh.
Come to find out later, the hearing officer had given us an incomplete decision. Like many of us do, he had saved a prior version and he sent that as the final document. I noticed it was missing stuff. I was like, man, he must have just run out of time. Immediately knew it wasn't but it was the first win. It was the second win after a 17-year break. I was just so excited to have won. So, I just stupidly was like celebrating and didn't think about the fact that it isn't clearly not a finished document. So
Huh.
anyway, time goes by. And anyway, I did have a conversation with that human later, and he did say that the state knew that that wasn't the final version, and they refused to let him provide the final copy to the parties. So, and even to tell us, like, I mean, to me, for all we knew, we might have lost in the final version. So, it would have been
Huh.
a risk to say, sure, send me the final version, but we had the right to know. And that didn't happen. So as we got to federal court now for the case for the appeal, we're actually bringing in the state and saying, you know what, this is bad behavior. Someone made that decision. They knew of the problem. They didn't tell me about it, and darn it, but we're going to investigate it. Now, because we don't get discovery, you go into due process and you don't get to ask any questions or interview any people or even get like internal documents or anything. So you go into due process with blinders on. If you get to federal court, you not get to say, come and sit down, let's do a
Yeah.
deposition, tell me what the truth is. And they're often so coached by them that, but that's the benefit of being in the federal court, is you get to ask the hard questions, and is that your final answer at least? And then if we have a document that disproves it, at least we can go from there. But and that's just reserved for the most ugly of situations, which I think that is. I think denying certain advocates state complaints is equal to that in malicious nature. So
Right. Right. And so for people that are watching us live or on the replay, feel free to type in your questions because Amy can answer them now. And if you're watching the replay, we can always circle back and answer any questions you have. So I appreciate everybody being here. We have Sandra from Pennsylvania, representing Pennsylvania. We have Megan from Indiana. It's like,
that's fun.
so yeah, and even though kind of the focus is because of where Amy practices in Utah, but what she's talking about today applies nationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always a few particulars with your state regs, but on this level, what she's talking about, I guess, right? Is that
Yeah.
correct,
No,
Amy?
that's true. Yep. It's
Yeah.
very much, most of IDEA is the same across different states. So every state has to propose their official rules for complying with IDEA. And most of the time, there's just really like 10 small things. Like one of ours is the appeal date after a due process. Nationwide, I think you get 60 days. In Utah, you get 30. So there's dumb little tiny things. But once the state says to the feds, hey, is this okay? The feds bless the version of the state has created, and it becomes the law of the land in your state. But there's not a lot of differences.
Well, and what about talking for a few minutes about what you and I have been talking about with state complaints and the records that the district releases to the state, but
Yeah.
as parents, we don't get copies of those. So
Yeah.
tell us about maybe there's some rule changes that we can make and
Yeah.
get around that.
Yeah. We also, you and I wanted to talk about cadre too.
Oh, that's
Um,
right.
I
Yes.
was trying, I'm
I'll
stuck in
bring
a,
up their website.
okay, you work on that. Okay, so let's do the request for records issue as a way to sort of address that. So the problem that I'm having right now is we'll make a very thorough records request, and one of two things happens. We either get a little tiny packet of three things, and they go here, and I'm like, oh no, or they say no, that's a FERPA request, or that's a grammar request. Like they'll mischaracterize an education record as a non-education record. So I've got my letter down to a science now, my request for records, and it says we're asking for special ed records A through Z. In case you want to call that FERPA, this is a FERPA request. In case you want to call that grammar, this is
Yeah.
a grammar request. So I've now just like
I
sprayed
love
and
that.
prayed. I call that. So I've eliminated the
Huh.
sparring that goes back and forth. I mean, we'd go back and forth 6 to 8 times about whether or not this. I'm just
Oh,
like, fine. So I'm
geez.
just like, how do you solve one of those problems that you're doing the same thing over and over and over, and that has seemed to solve the problem. So that's something I recommend. Um, the power of getting the records is they're not supposed to screen them first. If it's in your kid's file, you're supposed to be able to get it. And sometimes you get really interesting things that should, that should not be happening. So oftentimes they just screen it through and don't give it to you. But then when they mention it later, so in due process,
Yeah.
and this happened in Garden Valley, someone would say, well, that is in the such and such document. And we'd look at each other and go, do we have seen the such and such document? Anyone? And no one had seen it. And so after the third or fourth time, I said, stop, go get me this kid's file. And there were dozens and dozens of pages that we'd never seen before. So, and it's your right to hold that little special ed file if you want to too. So sometimes our plan is to take a scanner and say, we're here to review records. Do you have a table we can use? And just say, we'll do it ourselves. Hand over that folder. They cannot screen it out. If it's in your kid's folder, even if it says John Smith's name, fellow third grader, that's their problem. It's in your kid's folder. So anyway, it's a heated area at the moment because they're trying to cover but they need to provide those records to you. So let's see. I didn't answer your question fully, Charmaine. Remind me again.
Well, I was just, if there's a way that we can look at changing our state rules.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so in Idaho, a reporter made a grammar request to the state education office and asked for redacted copies of the state complaints for the last 12 months. And she got those, and it was amazing. She did such a fantastic job. I think that was Carly Flanders.
Right.
And she went district by district and said, this district was accused 6 times of doing A, B, and C. And it was just fantastic data. Like it was so powerful. When I made the same request in Utah, I got denied. So if I don't have the bandwidth right now to fight it, but some of my options would be to appeal it, the decision to say no to that to the records committee. I could also include them in a federal lawsuit like I'm doing with my other child and say it's wrong for you to say no. So there are some things we can do going over their head, which is difficult because they're a government agency. But I just think I'm a fan of repetition. So I will ask and I will give you 6 months and I will ask again and I will give you 6 months and I will ask again.
Yeah.
And then that third time I'm like, I've given you 3 chances. So definitely think about due process as far as telling the state, send an email and say, this is wrong. It happened again. This is wrong. So think about the case you're making as you give the state an opportunity to fix that, call them out, make it an issue, put it in writing. And then when you say it again the next time, and then you say it again the next time, they're knowing you're laying some foundation to come back and attack this in some way. So don't give up when you get a bad answer. Just think, okay, I'll ask you again soon and you can tell me no again on paper. So that's all part of the foundation that you need to be able to fight something like that. But again, that money, the biggest thing is going to be if we utilize the systems and they run out of money to do the actions they're required to do. That's going to me, the money is where the action comes from.
Right. And the other thing that I've started doing, and I think, like you said, so many times, it's like that repetition, like they're going to ask for this again. So, like when I help parents write state complaints,
Mhm,
you also get a chance to suggest the resolution that you
yes.
want.
Mhm, mhm,
So, um, so one of the things that we've been requesting is all the records that the
mhm.
district was, asked to send to the State Department.
Right.
We, as the parent, we also request copies of that. Now
Mhm,
that has been kind of mute, like like when the corrective action plan comes back, they don't have to say, "Well, you asked for this, we didn't give it to you." That
mhm.
state complaint officer figures the resolution.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that might be another way. And then the other thing is, just to have a conversation with whoever is your dispute resolution person at the State
Mhm.
Department,
Yeah.
and just say, I'm a little confused. I don't understand when parents can request records and
Yep.
these records are being sent and we
Mhm.
don't have copies of all of this.
When I've had the opportunity for that conversation has been when I sign up to attend teacher trainings. So when they do an inclusion conference and it's open, it's designed for teachers and principals, I sign up to go to those. And
Right.
then they often will come over and say, "Aren't you Amy?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." They're like, well, oftentimes they'll say, "Thank you for your work. We appreciate that's, wink, wink." But anyway, I believe they're sincere. But, but those are the times when you might build a little bit of a relationship or at least face to name where they're like, "Aren't you Mrs. Smith?" And you've done a couple of state complaints, and you say, "I am, yeah, I am." So you can. That's a good relationship to attempt. Depending on your person, it may or may not work, but at least it's that same bridge. You can get a little bit more with honey than So it's not a bad idea to try to reach out. Now, in my opinion, they're supposed to be providing technical assistance to everyone. So a teacher may have a question or a district and they call and get an answer. When we call, how come they're not giving us an answer? They're telling us to go back and talk to our district, right? So I don't think that they're doing the right thing by referring us back to our person who's gaslighting us. I think they have the same obligation to teach us as they do to correct the district. So
Right.
for me, that's a pending policy problem going to try to address. In regards to your requesting records from the state complaint, when we send our records in and the school sends them directly to the investigator, and then we get something back that's a lie in that state complaint, I want to know what the school gave you to make you think that. I think we have every right to receive the copy of the documents that's provided by the district to the state complaint officer. I've done a grammar request for our own kids' state complaint documents and got told no, that those
Uh,
records belong to the district and not to the child. And I was like, if I had more time and energy, I would have fought that one to the death. But I was just like, I was too busy. I couldn't do it. But, that's the kind of thing that would not easily, would be successful if you have a long range plan for fighting that because it's ridiculous. It's clearly wrong.
right. Right. Yeah, it is so hard. And I do want to share Cadre's website. So this is a National Technical Assistance. So they get funding from IDA Part D money to have this. And it's a wonderful resource if you've never checked out their website. They have specific tools and resources for families, which you don't often see sometimes, right?
Yes.
And they have great videos. You can go back and see past trainings. They have a wonderful continuum chart that shows, start here, prevention, right? Before we even have to get to a formal level, of dispute resolution. How
Mhm.
can we prevent this from, moving down the continuum? But so that chart itself, I think is really helpful for parents to see, and it can answer more questions about, like, I don't know, should I try mediation or what?
Right.
um and,
Could you jump back to my screen share for 1 second?
oh, did you pull it up,
I
or
have
this other one?
something from the IEP student website that uses
Oh,
the
okay.
Cadre info. I just wanted to
Oh,
share.
good, good,
There you
good,
go.
good.
Okay, so this is our page about state complaints. So what I loved about Cadre, the data's a little bit old, but I was able to use it to create this chart. So we were asking ourselves, how often is a state complaint successful? Like, we don't get to read anybody else's state complaint. We don't even know how many, we know the number that were turned in, but that information, some of it is available on Cadre. So every state has its own data page. And so the earliest information or most recent they have right now is 22, 23. So I was able to see that 23 state complaints were requested in that school year. 6 of them were withdrawn or dismissed. So there is, like that person from Indiana said, here we don't know how many of each, right? But obviously some of them do get dismissed, or it wouldn't even be a category. So we must have a little bit of that. And it could be that somebody who's never had an IEP files a state complaint and they're just like, sorry, we don't help you. So, they could be far from the mark. But 2 of those, of the 23, so 6 was dismissed or withdrawn, 2 weren't finished yet. So 17 finished complaint reports were done. So they investigated parent, so interviewed parent, interviewed school, look at the documents, write their report. And it has to be done in 60 days. So 17 out of 23 means a completion rate of 74%. Over the last, whatever that is, 12 years in Utah, the average completion rate is 77%. If you take so then Cadre will tell you at least how many of those finished reports had findings. So it could be you filed 5 of violation and you only won on 1, but that would count as a finding. So if they found anything wrong in that state complaint, then they'll tell you the number. And these are the same. In the first box, I compare the findings from the total filed, which is about 50-50. And then I compared the findings by those that didn't get withdrawn, dismissed, or pending. So of the ones that were finished. And I think this paints a pretty decent picture, at least the last few years here in our state, that about 75% of the time, 68 overall, when an investigator looks at your complaint, they find something that the school is doing wrong, and they will at least tell them that and tell them they have to train on that area. So you can see there have been years when, there's been a lot of completion, and then years when they're not having findings. So it really does depend on who is currently employed by your state to be the investigator. And that's something else I was researching when we hadn't won for 17 years in due process. I'm like, what is wrong? And part of it was, 2 of them are the attorneys for the biggest school districts in our area. So that would be part of the problem, right? So, part of fixing the state overall is digging into this kind of info. And this is available on Cadre. So you could pull it up for your state. You can go back. I think it goes back 10 years. So, but then I just keep adding to it as I go through the year just to kind of see, is it working? Because I have no idea. The other thing you could do is ask your friends. Like, you could be a repository. Like, if folks were willing to share with you their state complaint and you could make a little bank, then at least you could see a few people, if you compare, did they say yes to this family? Well, ours said that, and we got to know, we have no idea, right? So if there was an opportunity to share amongst yourselves and look through the state complaints of others besides your own, they're supposed to be screened a little bit for consistency, but it would be fascinating, I think, to take a look and see what they said. So that's the closest I've gotten to finding out how state complaints go.
I know. The other resource is the Advocacy Institute in Virginia. And they have on their website, they have a special tab or whatever for IDEA complaints. And what I love is, not only are there attorneys on there that have, written guides for parents about doing writing state complaints, they have examples of state complaints from different states. So I like going there because, like I said, again, you want to, let me show here.
Thank you. I've never seen this one before. That's exciting.
Yes, Candace Cortelia, she is like amazing. She's a firehouse. And she is like so dedicated to, keeping this information up to date and everything. But yeah, it's really a helpful place to go when you're like, you haven't filed a state complaint ever and you want to, like I said, get some examples, also see some examples of corrective action plans, things like that. So that's another good
Ooh.
website to go
Oh, I'm
to.
I'm a real nerd for charts and graphs. That's fun. I
I
really
know.
like that. Good job.
Yeah, you'll like it. You'll like it.
Mhm.
So I just want to again just show my appreciation, Amy, for what you've been teaching me the past few years,
Mhm.
and also what I continue to learn from you. And it's, I really hope that other advocates out there can find an attorney, relatively close, to have that relationship
Mhm.
with,
Mhm.
because yeah, there's ways that we can help each other, and that's the whole point of like me doing these Facebook
Mhm.
lives,
Mhm.
is to make sure that we can offer information to families that isn't readily available.
Yeah. Well, I feel
Um,
the same way about you. I've learned, just this. There's so few of us, right? Even nationwide, COPA has what, 4,000 members or six, maybe six this year, but there's not that many of us out there doing this fight. And so you do feel very dejected, beaten down, and alone. And so just to be able to share war stories, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm not the only one who just got gaslit by a district, and I'm an attorney. It is, you got to have friends because otherwise you
yes,
just couldn't keep going. It's just too difficult as a parent, as an advocate. So
yes. So I want to share again your nonprofit where your IEP student center is, because again, that is like you have built this wonderful, I mean, it's more than a resource library. It just
mhm.
seems like it's got so much more that
It's one of
you
those
know
planes that is flying with only one wing. Like there's still holes here and there, but we thought if we could dream up the structure, then we could fill in the library as we go. So if anyone has great links you think would be one, I mean, I'm happy to add. We're looking for anybody who like this one. I'm going to throw this on this week. So
yes, yes. So thank everybody for showing up. I know you have lots of things to do, especially when the school year is starting. And so I appreciate you giving us some of your time today. I
Mhm.
did ask in my Facebook group if people would be interested in like a written guide that I could, offer families. So I started that. I'm going to
Mhm.
be finishing that up, and then I'll email that out to parents. But um, yes, again, Amy, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
your
I'll
for
throw
your
out one
time.
small idea really quick. So
Good.
one thing that I've done when the parent felt that they could do their own state complaint, they've brought me in and we've hosted a training. So if you had a
Oh,
neighborhood that was really concerned about a particular school or a situation, you could bring Charmaine in or find an advocate and say, then when you wrote your state complaints together, then three of them might go in all at the same time for the same issue. And that would be really powerful too. So my final thought on
yes,
that.
I love it. It's called the
Mhm.
Pocatello idea,
Yeah,
right?
yes, that's what we did. We did it. Yeah, that's right. I forgot you were with me. We did that in Pocatello. Yep, that cute mom, Mrs. Buckley, brought us in. So.
Yes, yes. So yeah, so there are, resources, and sometimes it's like, yes, I have the resources, but I just need the moral support too.
Yep, exactly.
And so, yeah, that's another role that we often play. So
Yep.
until a couple of weeks from now, when we do our next Facebook Live, I just want to tell you that I am so like impressed with the parents that continue to fight. I'm also impressed with the parents that decide it's time for a break
Mhm,
and a
mhm.
rest.
Yep,
And they need to be seen as equally smart decision makers, right?
yep.
Because there are times when you just have to call a timeout, and that's okay. And I don't want you to feel like, oh, I
Mhm,
should be doing this. I should, don't should on yourself.
mhm, mhm,
When it comes time and you're like, okay, I'm ready, I really need to bump this up, that's a great time to reach out and to get that extra support. So
mhm, mhm.
I am Charmaine Tanner. I am here because I am passionate about making sure that your child is safe, happy, and learning every day beside their friends in that general ed classroom. So until next time, take care, and we appreciate you.
Thanks.